Hello my quilting friends! Leah Day here with a new quilting collaboration video. I just received this beautiful quilt block from Kate Colleran. Her website is seamslikeadream.com. So she has shared a tutorial on how to piece this block using her super cool braid template. So you can go check out her website and learn how to piece it. Now for me, you're going to learn how to quilt it. So the first task is to plan our quilting design and figure out how we're going to quilt it and what designs we're going to use. So let's get started. So here you can see Kate's little block, and it's a really cute combination of batik fabrics. And I believe all of these were designed by Jackie Kunkel. So it's really kind of a three-way combination. Jackie designed the fabrics, Kate pieced it up, and then I'm going to quilt it. So that's kind of a fun way that three people are working together to make one little quilt. So looking at this block, I saw a few challenges. And the main one is these are not symmetrical. You know, the orange and this lime green is the most dominant color in the quilt, but it's not symmetrical through each block. If that color and that piecing was identical in each one, then I would probably plan something around that. But because it's not, I see it a little distracting. You know, to me, that's kind of, it's adding an element that I really don't even know how to deal with that. So the next thing that inspired me, that really caught my eye, was the center square. And, you know, bothering to piece something like that into a quilt, you know, can take a little extra time. And I like that focal point. And I kind of want to zero your attention into it. So this is one of those situations that I'm going to design a quilting design to go right on top of the quilt. And I'm actually going to be a little intentionally distracting for the other designs going on. I'm going to center your focus right into that center square, and I'm going to kind of ignore everything else. And this is something that you are allowed to do. If you get a hold of a quilt and you're like, well, you know, what's the one part that you like the best? Ask yourself what that is, and then focus your attention around that one thing. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm centering up. This is one of Cindy Needham's Ultimate Rulers. And I love this one because it's just radiating squares. It's really fun to use. And I'm centering up around that center square. And I'm going to mark a few squares around it. So I think I'm going to mark 2 squares around it first. And then I'm going to give myself a little bit of space and mark a few more squares. So by doing this, I'm going to kind of break up the block and give myself a little bit more order to it, and give myself also something to work with, some kind of design that really works for me. So here we go. We've got 1 square marked, and I think I'm going to do a second square, so it's kind of like an echo of the first. So I'm just centering this back up again, making sure it's exactly where it was before. I'm going to mark this next set of lines. And then I think I want to give myself a little bit of space here before the next set of lines. And I've also got to pay attention, I've got a little bit of a border on this block as well. So I want to somehow incorporate that into this overall design. So I've zoomed in here so that way you can see my squares and how I've marked them, and I've connected the lines together so you can really see those shapes. And what I've decided to do is I'm going to take one filler design, that's a free motion quilting design, and I'm going to fill it in within that center square. Or I should say that's the middle square, because this is really the center square now. And I'm going to leave this one open. So I'm just going to quilt those straight lines I've marked and then leave it there. And then I'm going to pick another design for this border. And that will stretch all the way from these middle lines to the outer edge of the quilt. And, you know, I'll be honest, this could make a complete mess of this beautiful little quilt top. It's worth trying something adventurous and playing with these designs just to see what happens. And this was my best idea and my inspiration for this quilt, so I'm going to give it a go. As for thread color, I've chosen this green. It's kind of a lime green isocord thread, and you can see it blends in with a few of these colors but contrasts nicely with the darker ones. It's not going to show up all over the place, but it's going to show up, I think, just enough to really stand out and be a pretty thread for this whole quilt. So now that we have a plan, I'm going to get this basted up and ready to quilt. So I have already stitched the squares, and I used ruler foot quilting for that, but you could also use your walking foot. And now I've started filling in the space between those lines with a design called flowing leaves. So here's how you stitch it. We're going to start with a leaf shape. That's kind of a pointy teardrop. So I'm going to come to a point and then swing back around and return to my starting point. There are a lot of seam allowances in this, so I have to be really careful as I stitch over them. Now I'm going to stitch a vine line down the center, and it's going to be kind of curvy. I'm going to go all the way to the tip and then travel stitch back, and it's okay if that's a little messy. And now I'm going to stitch back along it and branch out, kind of a curvy little branch, and that's creating the look of the little veins, the vines, and stuff on leaves. So just a back and forth, real gentle curve. And like I said, it's okay if it gets messy. It's not a big deal. If you really want it to look exactly perfect, you could always travel stitch back and forth a bit and build up some more thread. Like that one, I might go back through it and build up a little extra thread through it. And then go all the way to the tip and then all the way back down again. You know, when in doubt, throw more thread at it. It always ends up looking better. Now this is a pivoting design, so I'm going to pivot and echo. And I've kind of got a few lines to work around. And of course those straight lines, I don't want to overlap them, so I'm just going to fill this little weird area with some back and forth echoes. So I'm just stitching up, travel stitching down that straight line, returning to that edge, travel stitching just a bit, and just going back and forth to fill up that whole little gap with back and forth lines. And that's going to really add, you know, nice movement, nice texture to the quilt top, and it's going to fill in that gap at the same time. Now I really want these squares to stand out on the quilt surface, so I'm going to go back and forth along them a few times, just travel stitching, making sure that there's plenty of thread built up over those areas. And now I'm going to travel stitch around that leaf shape a few times on this side. So I'm going to hit that starting point where I started the leaf shape, and I'm going to circle back around and then travel stitch along the edge of that square and then swing out again. So the nice thing is you kind of have two different things that you're focusing on. You're focusing on forming that leaf shape, and then you're focusing on filling in all of the gaps and all of those lines around it. Occasionally you're going to have to split something in half, split the design in half. So here I'm just going to stitch half the leaf shape, just kind of butt right up against that straight line as if the straight line is bisecting it. I'm going to travel stitch down that line. I could also have swung out along the outside with an echo along the side, but again, I really like those squares to stand out, so I'm doing a little extra travel stitching along them intentionally. You don't have to do that, but when you really want something to stand out nicely, little extra thread is all it takes usually. So that is the vine line I've just stitched, and now I'm going to quilt along it, curving out, filling that in so it has really pretty texture, and it's going to look just like a leaf. I love this design. It adds such a nice amount of movement, and because all of these batiks seem kind of organic, you know, lots of leaves, lots of kind of frondy shapes, I think this is perfect. You do one more and then just travel stitch all the way back. There we go. And now from here, I'm going to escape. I'm going to travel stitch between those two leaves and swirl out for my echo. I'm going to hit up against that straight line, travel stitch, and then swing back. And how I know what to do, you know, how I'm able to kind of always know what the next step is in the design is that I've memorized it. And this is kind of like knowing how to sign your name in cursive. You don't question how to sign your name because you've signed it a million times. You know, some point, probably third grade, you learned how to do cursive. And you memorize the rules of all those cursive shapes. Well, I've done basically the same thing with this flowing leaves design. I've memorized these steps, and that's how I'm able to stitch it. That's also how I'm able to stitch it even if I can't really see what I'm doing. This is very busy, and it ended up being a lot busier than I was expecting, but I can still see what I'm doing and know what step is next because I've memorized the rules. And the rules are stitch a leaf shape, fill the leaf stage with those vines, and then expand it slightly with those back and forth echoes, with those rows and rows of echo quilting. So I'm going to finish filling in this area with flowing leaves, then I'm going to pick another design to stitch into this background area next. So I finished quilting flowing lines in this area and it ended up coming out pretty busy. So I've decided to use ruler foot quilting to quilt in the background. And what I'm going to do is just echo these piecing lines that Kate has pieced. So I'm lining up and I've actually marked a little bit of that line so that way I can line up my ruler foot and be able to stitch along it. And so I'm going to stitch through the border and then basically I'm stitching in the ditch here, and I'm kind of trying to make sure I stay right in the ditch, and the ruler is more of assistance in this situation. So I'm just pressing the ruler against the edge of the ruler foot and then also down onto the quilt and guiding the whole thing through the arm of the machine. So I'm going to rotate here, and the reason is it just feels more natural for me, and also just make sure that the quilt edge is nice and flat too. And then I need to quilt straight off and into the border. I want to make sure that line stays nice and straight. So I'm still in the ditch here. And basically I'm just going to be quilting these arrow shapes, these triangle shapes, and just continuing to echo those a 1/4 inch away. So we've got our baseline now, and this is going to be, it's going to be easier from here because I can just line up with the line I've just stitched. I'm going to line up the ruler foot with that line I've just stitched, and now I'll be quilting exactly a 1/4 inch away. So I'm pressing against the ruler foot. I'm also pressing down on the quilt and guiding the whole thing through the machine. And this is, you know, with the backing and stuff, you know, this is about 18 inches or so. And so it does feel kind of puffy, and you just have to figure out how to kind of get it all to work and keep the ruler, the template, in the right position, and also make sure that the quilt is guiding through nice and evenly too. And I'm using template number 5 from the Dresden Plate template set here. It's a real small, you know, shape, nice straight lines. So I really like using this one because it's easy to use even when the quilt, I don't have a lot of space in the arm of the machine or a lot of space around the quilt to position it. And so I'm just going to continue echoing this triangle shape until that area is completely filled. And then I'll travel stitch and start echoing this way. And I'm going to continue echoing lines all the way out until that space is completely filled. Now, these areas here where we kind of have this little bar that goes towards the center, I wanted to accent that. So I stitched the lines a little closer together. And that's a little tricky, so let me show you how to do that next. So if you notice, the lines, the piecing lines through these areas don't really line up. So I use these long bars to kind of break up the two areas of the design. So I'm going to quilt in here with a straight line running parallel with that seam line. So I'm just positioning my ruler and stitching straight down, and I'm going to stop a 1/4 inch or when my foot hits this square, this inner square. Now I'll rotate around. It's just a habit for me to rotate. You don't necessarily have to, but I do think that sometimes my machine feeds the quilt better if whatever I'm quilting is going through the machine the way like the machine would like it to go through. That's just me. You don't have to quilt it that way though. You can pretty much leave it in one direction and just move your ruler around. That'll work too. So I've echoed that a 1/4 inch away, and now I'm going to position the needle right in the middle of that space, and I'm going to quilt right down the middle and then back in. So it's just basically going to be a lot of travel stitching. Now I don't have a line to line up with my ruler. I'm just kind of eyeballing it and hoping that it's about 1/8 of an inch away. I'm going right down the middle of a 1/4 inch set of lines, so that should be about 1/8 of an inch away. And now I'm going to travel stitch all the way back. And now I'm going to quilt in between the first set of lines and the ditches. I'm going to rotate around here again, travel stitch out and over. And the nice thing is, pretty much what I've found is just get your needle in the right position. Kind of eyeball those two lines and get your needle in the middle. And we have this middle line that I can put my ruler on. It might not necessarily be perfectly straight, but it's a good line to work off of. Now, I just made a mistake. I realized my foot veered away from my template, and so now it's inaccurate. rather than kind of jump immediately back and make kind of a weird stitch, I'm going to stitch a few slow stitches, and it's going to be a little wobbly, but it's better than kind of a big jump. So that line is not quite as perfect as it could be, but it's also not terrible. I'm going to leave it in. Sometimes you got to leave little things like that alone and not obsess about them. And just remember, when ruler foot quilting, you're still free motion quilting, so you could go in all different directions. The only thing that's going to control your foot and keep it in position is the ruler. You've got to keep it pressed up against that ruler, and that is what guides it and keeps those lines perfectly straight. So that's how I broke this up. I really love this effect of the straight lines, and I like that I broke it up with a little bit denser quilting through these areas. I think it ended up coming out just exactly right. And here's what it looks like whenever I finished Kate's quilt. So that's it for this video. I really hope that you've enjoyed seeing how I quilted Kate's quilt, and I hope that you will go check out her website, seamslikeadream.com, and learn how she pieced this really cute quilt block. So I love collaborating with other quilters because I oftentimes receive quilts or blocks that I would probably never have designed and quilted myself. So it's always a fun challenge to try something new. Of course, if you have any questions about this quilting process, please ask in the comments below. I'm here to help you learn more about machine quilting. If you enjoyed this video, please share it with your friends and subscribe to my channel on YouTube so you don't miss out on the next quilting video coming out soon. Until next time, let's go quilt!